The human spirit is unconquerable. We are individuals and we are sovereign, born with unlimited potential, gifted from our Creator. Our mission is to break free from the systems that bind us.
I volunteer as tribute.
We strive for peace and prosperity and overcome all challenges, roadblocks, and obstacles. We are empowered because we think for ourselves and we act for ourselves. We are self-reliant and independent, but guided by the wisdom of those who share our values.
What possible difference can I make?
There is no government, no ruler, nor ideas that are able to stop us. We are driven to succeed because we seek political freedom, financial freedom, and spiritual freedom.
It's all for nothing if you don't have freedom.
This is Mike Corbell, and you are listening to the Invictus Mind. Well, hello, everyone. This is your host, Mike Corbell. This is the Invictus Mind podcast. I'm happy to be here and happy for the listeners to this program. It seems the powers that be do not want this message to be let out, as I have been temporarily suspended from using Facebook. And of course, there is no way to appeal this process or even ask what I did to get in trouble. This happened for a day a couple weeks back, but now it's a 7-day ban, and honestly, I'm not even sure I care. We will continue to spread the message of political freedom, financial freedom, and spiritual freedom regardless. As always, you can find this program on your favorite podcatcher. We are currently on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, and Castbox. If you like this show and finds it adds value to you, then please share it with 3 of your friends and leave me a review on Apple. Right now, you can also find my content and all the alternative channels. I post this show and my other work on Twitter, LinkedIn, MeWe, Minds.com, and Float. The videos of this podcast will be up on YouTube as long as they allow it. However, since I do believe that it is important to network and stay in communication, the best way to ensure you have access to this content and more is by joining the Invictus newsletter. There I will share the podcast, the show notes, and of course, all the other important information. If you are looking for a business opportunity, just want to learn a couple of tips on how to better yourself financially, or check out any of the affiliates I work with, including the Tuttle Twins book series, and information regarding Kratom, CBD, or Delta-8 THC products, all you need to do is text the word Invictus, as INVICTUS, to the number 33777. There you can join the email list and stay in the loop. All right. Well, today in the show, I welcome back a guest who appeared in episode 32. His name, of course, is Michael Harris. He works as a criminal defense attorney in the state of Texas. And not only has he been on this show, but he's made a couple of appearances on my friend's show, the Year Zero program. I asked Michael to return to the program to discuss the recent inauguration of President Joe Biden and a little history of the inaugural process. I think this will be an exciting discussion. So without further ado, here's Michael Harris. How you doing today, Michael?
I'm doing well, Michael. These days, I'm grateful when anybody gives us any kind of a platform where we can talk about law and liberty. So happy to share what I think and what I've learned and what I know.
Well, I appreciate that.
Which is my opinion, which is legal history and so forth.
Yeah. Well, getting banned on Facebook just opened my eyes to the fact that we need to go harder, right?
Well, I think in the game of chess, the knight goes around pawns. So we need to find some ways to go around loopholes. And I can tell you that the current debate among libertarians is kind of like, can these private companies do that? Now, there is case law out there that says that when a quote unquote private business entity becomes so large and so powerful that they begin to act as if they are a government entity, then they are subject to the rules of a government. And I think definitely big tech has gotten there. Now, I didn't have the time to go do an in-depth research to be able to quote you cases and so forth on, or any kind of where that line is drawing. But I think definitely that's going to be an issue that is going to be litigated in the coming days.
Yeah, I'm very sure of it. There is some precedent for this type of action in the history of the United States. We'll get into that a little later, but I just wanted to start about the interesting event that took place in Washington, D.C. this week. You know, of course, it could be said anything that takes place in D.C. is interesting, but on Wednesday, we had another coronation, or what I call a coronation, for the 46th king of these United States.
I prefer emperor myself, but as far as Washington, D.C., I think John F. Kennedy said it best, that Washington, D.C. had all the charm of the North and all the energy of the South. So, but yeah, I think Emperor Biden, and I think we should openly call him an emperor at this stage of the American history, got empowered as the 46th emperor of the United States. And one thing is kind of like, the big, great theme, according to the mainstream media, is how we're all so wonderfully united. Michael, I don't know about you, but I don't feel united. And, I think it's really easy to say that you're united when you've got 20,000 armed National Guardsmen around you. So, you feel very, very united under a circumstance like that. So, but that being said, I think one of America's founders really didn't agree on very many things, but one thing they did really agree on is that they wanted to see a peaceful transfer of power. So I think what happened on January 20th qualified as a peaceful transfer of power. Now, I don't, it's kind of like a peaceful transfer of power at the point of 20,000 armed National Guardsmen. That's a bit unusual in American history. I don't think that's ever happened before.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that is unprecedented, and doesn't sound like it's very peaceful. I mean, 20,000 troops there. You know, what's the government trying to hide? Were they there trying to protect Biden? Or are they trying to protect the revolt or the uprising of the citizens? It's like, okay, what are we to expect of the next 4 years under this the Emperor Biden, as you call it? I got to get a soundtrack for that, like, Darth Vader soundtrack.
The Empire Strikes Back here. Well, I mean, for whatever it's worth, I think of what were described as the viable candidates that the Democratic Party put out. I think Joe Biden was probably the least bad and the most likely to beat Donald Trump, which that was setting the bar pretty damn low. So I think his whole thing is he's going to try to recreate the Obama administration. It's kind of like in his mind, and from what I've listened to supporters, it's like Obama 3.0. I don't think it's going to work out, to be honest with you. I think definitely we're headed to a collapse of our monetary system for certain in the next 4 years. On that front, I just don't see how our monetary system, but I mean, I'm a lawyer, not an economist, even though I did study under one of the greatest economists of all time, Murray Rothbard. So I do have some background talk about that, but really law and history are my primary fields of expertise.
Well, that's perfect, Michael. Anybody who's read a few books by Mises or by Rothbard, can understand that what the government is doing is just not sustainable. And that's probably on the back of everyone's mind, is what's going to happen with our monetary system. But we're not here to talk about that today, because you can turn on any libertarian show and get lectured for hours about how that stuff works.
Well, one of these days you ought to have me come on and talk about the whole Bretton Woods agreement and where that led in history, because I mean, a good Murray Rothbard student could tell you all about that. But I'm more interested right now in the whole thing of them shutting down people and kicking people off social media. I mean, the whole thing with Apple and Amazon and the site Parler. Now, I was not on Parler. I did not parlay with people or anything. And I use Apple products. I buy things on Amazon, but I am not at all wild about Apple just suddenly deciding that we're going to, kill you. We're going to eliminate your app, and Amazon saying that we're going to kick you off our platforms. Just purely arbitrary, and the excuse, and I think Barack Obama's chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, had the classic Democratic socialist line of never let a crisis go to waste. That is their mentality, is anything that they can call a crisis and they can use to expand the size, shape of a centralized government, they're going to use it. Now, what surprises me is that these companies like Apple, like Amazon, are just willing participants in the process. Now, what I know about this events that took place on January 6th, there was a lot of things that led up to it. But from what I've heard, there was most of the people who found out about it and it came from Facebook and Twitter, not from Parler, which I know that there's some kind of group that calls themselves Women for America First. Who exactly they are, who exactly what their funding is from, very serious question that frankly I think should be investigated. But they were very, very active on Facebook. I haven't seen any evidence at all that they were active on Parler. So I just, speaking as a lawyer, I don't see how they can use the grounds as that to just totally kill the business of Parler. I know I heard an interview of Parler's CEO, Megyn Kelly, the journalist interviewed him, and he said that they were working closely with Amazon before this happened. And all of a sudden, after this happened, Amazon just notified them abruptly they were being kicked off, and because they weren't doing a good enough job of monitoring violence. And they offered to use Amazon's product. It's kind of like, hey, y'all say that y'all have this great product that monitors on your cloud server for violent and illegal stuff. We'll use your product. And apparently Amazon's own product wasn't good enough to clear, and give them clearance. Now, speaking as a lawyer, I think Parler's got a pretty good case to make that Amazon acted as if it was a government agent, an arm of the government. It should be under the same rules and jurisdiction as a government agent.
Yeah. So that could be like a racketeering charge or something like that, right?
Well, I think he'd have a hard time making a criminal case stick. I think as far as civil litigation, I think they definitely could have a civil lawsuit to make. And I think it would tie into the First Amendment and right to free speech, right to free press, independent media. Also, it's kind of like, let's note the fact that the mainstream media is actively participating in the burying of Parler. So yeah, they're part of it as well.
What's disappointing to me is I was late joining the Parler game, but I saw this the writing on the wall before the infamous January 6th incident, that the social media companies were just left and right starting to cut people off. And one of my mentors told me to get on Parler because he said that the algorithm for that was actually more open than on Facebook. In other words, as a content creator, I was more likely to see my stuff seen by the viewers and have it actually advertised quicker than I would on Facebook, for example. So I built up a list, and I had it up to about 250 followers right before that all happened. And now it seems like that went away. Now I got to start from scratch on some of these other channels like MeWe and Float and whatnot. So it's a constant battle to have what I think is probably best for the future anyway, is decentralization of social media.
Oh, I think it's definitely going to have to be decentralized. And I will say that you podcasters are the leaders in it. I kind of see you podcasters performing the role of pamphleteers and leading up to the American Revolution. You're the people on the outside. Most Americans don't know this today, but actually the British colonial officials, the governors sent from England, they didn't like American newspapers, so they banned a lot of American newspapers, and they prosecuted American people who ran colonial, quote unquote, colonial press. So one of the responses that the colonists did was, well, we'll just start sending out pamphlets instead of newspapers. Yeah, that's kind of like a little legal way around the problem. So that's kind of the way I see you podcasters now, is you're performing the same function as the pamphleteers did leading up to the American Revolution.
Well, there you go. So speaking of American Revolution and historical times in the United States, I think one of the big problems facing this generation is that they lose a lot of the historical facts that took place in the United States. I mean, of course, this past election was highly contentious, but I don't think it was probably the most contentious, as some people might say, in the history of elections. I'm thinking back to the election of 1801.
Well, 1800. But yeah, I definitely think a good argument could be made that the election of 1800 was way more contentious than this one was of 2020. And as far as going back and to go back into the kind of the history of, when they, America started off with the Articles of Confederation. And as far as history, I think it should be pointed out that our entire legal system is based on history. Okay. I mean, we don't have like a divine right of king who's anointed by a pope or anything like that to say who our leaders were. Basically, we are a nation that's, it's been well stated, we're a nation of laws, not of men. And so, yeah, our entire legal system is based on the study of history. So I shouldn't look at it as completely irrelevant. Me personally, I've always been fascinated by history. I've loved it. Been a history student. At one time, I seriously considered becoming a history professor, but that was right at the point that the political correctness movement was getting started. So I was like, I'm going to law school instead, become a lawyer. But we started off as the Articles of Confederation, very loose collection of different states. After we won independence from the British, and the British finally decided they were going to leave us alone, they still continued to function under the Articles of Confederation. I won't go into all the details of everything, of all the pros and cons, but basically, initially, they decided they were going to have a convention to revise, quote unquote, revise the Articles of Confederation. And basically, it was 78 white male property owners met in secret in Philadelphia to create a new government. If you want to call it a coup, you can, but it's kind of like, wasn't totally above board. But the main thing, if you were able to take a poll of most Americans at the time and say, who are the two most popular Americans, they would have said George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. And both of them were there. And both of them kind of approved of it. So that carried a lot of weight in a lot of people. But mainly when it came to the ratification process, the group of people who supported what came out of the Philadelphia Convention, they were called the Federalists. Mm-hmm. The people who opposed it were called the Anti-Federalists. Okay, so the Anti-Federalists were what today we would consider libertarians and anarchists. Okay, the Anti-Federalists found out really quickly, though, that they had major problems when it came to fighting and opposing the ratification of the Constitution. Number one, lessons that the libertarians have still not learned. They were completely disorganized. They had no leadership. But almost as important is the fact that they had no media. The Federalists controlled the newspapers in all the major cities. So they had no media coverage whatsoever. So the Constitution did get ratified. Now, James Madison was smart enough to realize he was part of the Federalists. He wrote many of the Federalist papers, and he did play a major role in the writing of the Constitution. I think this whole thing now, we call him the father of the Constitution. No, he played a big part in it, but no, he wasn't the father of it. Yet what he did do after the ratification process, he kind of went to the other Federalists and said, these anti-Federalists, they do have some valid points.
Mhm.
So he did write up the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. So he did play a major role in the drafting of the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and having them included in the Constitution. So that he did do. Now, the thing is, when they initially came up with the idea of a president, Madison's original idea was the people elected the House of Representatives, the members of the House of Representatives. Then the members of the House of Representatives decide who the senators are going to be. Then the senators decide who the president's going to be. So it's kind of like this little kind of like layer cake thing of the top people filter up.
Yeah, and there was a lot of contention over that because
yes, there was a lot.
One thing the founders wanted to avoid was executive governance, and so they were concerned about the mob rule in a democratic process by having just an average citizen vote, but then they also thought that there could be a lot of corruption with just the states themselves picking the electors for president.
Well, it's the thing that they had broken away from the British monarchy, so most of them did not want to go back to a new monarchy. Alexander Hamilton being an exception in that court. But so, yeah, they were, on the one hand, actually, they were pretty hostile to democracy as a whole. I mean, John Adams in particular had seen the excesses of mob violence in Boston during the colonial period. Mm-hmm. So they were pretty hostile to, on the one hand, they did not want to have a new American king to replace the British king. On the other hand, they did not want mob violence, mob rule. So what they looked to in history was the Roman Republic. And you can see that in their architecture. I mean, the pen names they used when they wrote the Federalist Papers. And they were pretty good students of Roman history. So they wanted to create a republic to replace the British monarchy. Their big fear is that the republic would turn into an empire. Some of them refer to it as the Roman curse of when a republic turns into an empire. So that was what they really truly wanted to avoid. Now, the initial plan is that there would be the presidential election would kind of function like today's Iowa caucuses, that the voters would kind of weed out, give us like a top 4 or 5 candidates, and then the House of Representatives takes that list and they pick the best. They really truly believed that George Washington was the only person who was really ever going to get a majority vote, because by that time Benjamin Franklin was so old he couldn't even walk. Mm-hmm. So they really truly believed that old George was the only one who's ever going to get a majority of the vote. The person who gets the second most votes will be the vice president, then the president picks his cabinet, so forth, so forth. Obviously, the first 2 terms that George Washington had worked without a problem. George Washington's like, after his 2 terms, he's like, I'm having enough. I'm going back to Mount Vernon. George Washington put all his support behind his vice president, John Adams from Massachusetts. A lot of people felt like, okay, after all these years of the Virginian George Washington, it'd probably be a good idea to have somebody from another state anyway. So, and John Adams was, very good and well with the Federalist. Now, very early on in George Washington's administration, though, things started breaking up into 2 factions. Mm-hmm. They rallied around Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's Treasury Secretary. Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of State. I should also point out that during Thomas Jefferson had absolutely nothing to do with the writing of the Constitution. He was America's ambassador to France during his time. So he wasn't even in the country when all this was going on. Now, he did write later, these are the things I like about the Constitution. These are things I do not like about the Constitution. So he did kind of play a part And I think Madison in particular gave a lot of deference to Thomas Jefferson. So he did play a part there. But when it came to the actual governing of the country, very rapidly, these two factions rose up. And actually, most of the founders were actually terrified by the idea of what we now call political parties. It really just scared the bejesus out of them when they saw these two political parties just rise up from apparently nowhere, because there's nothing about that in the Constitution at all. Okay, but move forward to George Washington retires. John Adams gets the election as his replacement. Thomas Jefferson gets the second most votes. So therefore, under the procedure at the time, Thomas Jefferson becomes John Adams' vice president. Mm-hmm. If you want the greatest example of a disloyal vice president, basically Thomas Jefferson comes in second in that category. Number one will come in later into the story if we go into Aaron Burr later. But anyway, as the rules at that time, John Adams becomes president, Thomas Jefferson becomes vice president. Now, it was during this period of time that there are a lot of events that led to the Alien and Sedition Acts. That is definitely the black mark in John Adams' history. If you want me to go into the details, you'll talk about silencing dissent, kicking people off Facebook, deplatforming Parler. That's nothing compared to what was going on with the Alien and Sedition Acts. They put people in jail. Yeah. I mean, they lock people up in cages for writing things that John Adams didn't, and the Federalists did not want them to write. So,
what I read about that was, of course, you mentioned political parties. We had, I believe, it was no longer the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, but I think it became the Whig Party and the Democratic Republican Party, which is actually now today just the Democrat Party.
Well, that was a little bit later. Jefferson, like I said, the Anti-Federalists realized that they needed to do a better job, as we now say, of messaging, and they needed a leader. So they very quickly saw Thomas Jefferson as their leader, and they started rallying around Thomas Jefferson. And this is about the time that James Madison left the Federalists. Now, they called them, the followers of Thomas Jefferson called themselves Democratic Republicans. I don't know why. That's just what the name they settled on. Going to call ourselves Democratic Republicans. Mm-hmm. And so it was the Federalist and the Democratic Republicans. But the whole thing with the Alien and Sedition Acts, that led to a very simple question of what do you do when Congress enacts an unconstitutional law? Because that was something that really wasn't addressed in the Constitution, of what exactly do we do when Congress passes and the president signs an unconstitutional law. Now, Jefferson and Madison, their response is that you can look it up in the history of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. They said, well, if enough states get together, they can declare an act of the federal government unconstitutional. That was the response that Jefferson and Madison came up with.
Nullification.
Basically the nullification argument. Mm-hmm. But throughout the election of 1800, in all this time, basically, we almost went to war with France during this period of time. Most people do not realize that, which I won't go into that. But yeah, we very, very, very nearly were at a major war with France during this period of time. That's really was the driving force behind the Alien and Sedition Acts. But things got so chaotic and almost out of hand, but there was actually a serious movement to try to get George Washington to come out of retirement to once again be president for a third time. Problem with that plan was that George Washington died in 1799. So that plan really got shot to hell in a handbasket really fast.
Right.
And so basically wound down to the election of 1800. By this time, I'll just use the phrase anti-federalist versus the Federalists led by John Adams. And the Federalists still continued to support John Adams. The Democratic Republicans, though, they had at least learned a lesson that they needed to organize. So, buddy, they organized. They got behind Thomas Jefferson and a man from New York called Aaron Burr. And so they's like, we are united that we are 100% going to vote for Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr with our 2 votes. You were allowed to vote two people back then. They were so successful at organizing their votes, that basically Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr basically tied for first. That's how they were so successful at organizing the electoral college that basically they were tied. And so it kind of like, okay, what do we do now? We've got 2 candidates that we all both agreed we wanted to be president and vice president, but it was supposed to be Thomas Jefferson as the president and Aaron Burr as the vice president. Mm-hmm. And now you would think the obvious solution to that would be Aaron Burr from New York. It's kind of like, well, this was a big misunderstanding. I'll be number 2, and I'll take the high road. I'll step aside, let big TJ be the big guy, and I'll wait my time. Nope, and that definitely is not what happened. Aaron Burr, basically, he told Thomas Jefferson and the other anti-Democratic Republicans, I got just as much right to be president as Thomas Jefferson does. Mm-hmm. That threw things into a complete and total chaotic mess that got sent to the House of Representatives. And I think they had something like 20 separate votes, and it kept coming the same way every single time. They could not break the deadlock. And of all people, Alexander Hamilton was the one who put his support behind Thomas Jefferson to make Thomas Jefferson the president. And basically, Alexander Hamilton's like, I don't like Thomas Jefferson. I don't trust Thomas Jefferson, but I really hate Aaron Burr. And so yeah. Now, after that's when they passed the 12th Amendment to set up the current system where they have a completely separate vote for president and vice president. Mm-hmm. And that's really what locked in, for all practical purposes, the current system that we have. Interesting little side note in history that things got so bad between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel where Aaron Burr shot and killed him. Mm-hmm. Say what you want to about Donald Trump and Joe Biden. They didn't try to kill each other, at least. So
I think they should bring back the duel, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I mean, Rudy Giuliani in the rally on January 6th said that they were going to bring back trial by combat.
There you go.
Which, speaking as a lawyer, that would basically be the equivalent of a Harvard professor of astrophysics saying it's going to bring back the notion that the sun revolves around the Earth.
Oh no. Michael, correct me if I'm wrong in this history. At the same time that the fiasco between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr was going on, John Adams was still. This was the end of his first term, and he was still in the contention to run a second term. But people like Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr more. In fact, I heard that because Jefferson and Burr were tied, Adams came in third, and he was just so discouraged by that he didn't even attend the inauguration, which in my mind, Trump did not attend this one for Biden. I had not heard that before, but John Adams did not attend Jefferson's inauguration.
John Adams refused to attend the inauguration of Thomas Jefferson. That was back in the days when they had the 3/5 clause, where slaves were counted as 3/5 of the person in the population. Plus, also, in fact, one of the effects the events that led to the Alien and Sedition Acts was there was a very large immigration of French people to the southern states. Combination of the French Revolution and the Haitian slave revolt in Haiti led to a large influx of Frenchmen to America, French Catholics.
And they were pro Jefferson, right?
They were very pro Jefferson, and plus the fact that John Adams was a New England Puritan, and really in the late 17th century, basically the two great tastes that did not go great together were New England Puritans and French Catholics. Those two just simply did not mix very well. So John Adams and his supporters were very, very keen to point out now that John Adams got the majority of the vote of native-born white men. So that created that was their big ploy is that John Adams got the majority vote of native-born white men. So that led to a lot of hard feelings as well. But not only did the Federalists get voted out, not only did John Adams lose the presidency, but also the Democratic Republicans wound up winning the majority vote of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. So therefore, John Adams and the Federalists kind of like, oh, what do we do now? Well, they had so they decided they were going to pack the court system. Because they were going to lose the presidency, they were going to lose control of the House, they were going to lose control of the Senate. So as they said, our last bastion is we are going to pack the court system. So John Adams and his Secretary of State, John Marshall, just started filling out judicial appointments literally their last days in office. From what we can tell, the two of them were up until midnight on the final day of John Adams' administration, just basically creating judicial appointments right to the very till the clock struck midnight.
Interesting.
And yeah, apparently they just left them on a table. It is kind of like just an incredible number of them. And they created something like 70 justices of the peace for Washington, D.C., which at the time, Washington, D.C. was basically just a glorified slave labor camp. So like, why on earth did they need 70 justices of the peace? There were so many appointments that when Thomas Jefferson came in, he made his Secretary of State, James Madison. They walk into the White House, and from what we can tell, literally they just walked in and they saw this great big huge pile of judicial appointments just sitting on a table. And like, what do we do with these? And apparently Thomas Jefferson was so angry at John Adams for doing that he told James Madison, just don't even deliver them. And that led to a famous case, Marbury versus Madison, which, I mean, if you want me to talk about that, I will. But kind of like it was that ultimately that led to the decision of what do you do when a Congress passes an unconstitutional law with that unusual set of circumstances there.
It sounds like, Michael, from the very beginning that this idea of the Constitution didn't really bode well for the politicians themselves, but yet the powers that be just continue to grow more tyrannical throughout history. You know, we can fast forward history a little bit and talk about other types of elections, because again, I think a lot of people in today's world think that this division in Washington is like a brand new thing, but it's been very vitriolic for a long time. I mean, you think about the election of Buchanan and of course Lincoln, which led to the Civil War, and I'm just going through history, some of the other things that happened.
Well, I mean, we've had several elections that were questionable, presidential elections. Most people don't know this today, but the election of 1960 between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, it is portrayed by the mainstream media and academics of this great triumph of the Kennedys and all this Camelot stuff. That's a bunch of bull. All right. Basically, the reason that Kennedy won and Nixon lost is the state of Illinois. that the Democrats controlled Chicago and northern Illinois. The Republicans controlled the southern Illinois, the suburbs around St. Louis. It was blatantly the fact that the Democrats just did a better job of stuffing the ballot boxes in Illinois. That's the reason why John F. Kennedy carried the state of Illinois and won the 1960 election. Now, the thing that was different about Richard Nixon was his response to that is, you know what, I'm a pretty young guy. I'll be back. So he just kept quiet, said, I'll be back, which of course, eventually he was back. So that was another presidential election that was far more, contentious. Also, the election of 1876. I tend to get slightly dyslexic with my numbers, by the way. So the election of 1876 was one where the Republicans were still in control of the South due to Reconstruction, some Civil War. So basically, it's there was literally Army soldiers controlling the polling booths, the polling places. There was men in uniform with guns, as people were coming in to vote. And surprise, surprise, the Republicans carried all these electoral places in the South, much to the disapproval of the local population. And that led to such a massive uproar because the Republican candidate Harrison won that one. No, I think that was Rutherford B. Hayes that won that election. That led to such a massive uproar that led to pulling out troops out of the South, and the Posse Comitatus Act regarding using military on civilians was a result of that election.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that the last time you were on the show, the Posse Comitatus Act. Okay. Interesting. So, well,
I've done a podcast interview too since then, so it's hard to remember. I'm about to turn 56, so I have a little trouble remembering who I've told what to. Okay.
Fair enough. So we just reviewed about 200 years of American history in about 30 minutes. For most people, history started, 4 years ago when Trump was elected, and I just find it fascinating. This process that we go through, the peaceful transition of power still remains, although we wonder, if that power that is elected actually is peaceful. I guess that could be a side conversation right there. But for now, 45 men who became president, but we have 46 presidents. Grover Cleveland had a term in between another one. If I recall.
He's the only one who did not, who got elected, lost, and came back and won a second time. For whatever it's worth, Grover Cleveland was one of Murray Rothbard. I think he was Murray Rothbard's favorite president, for whatever that's worth.
Okay. So moving forward, there's speculation that Donald Trump's going to come back in 2024. I personally don't think he will. I don't see why he would. Why would he subject himself to the 4 years of hell that he just went through? But, he's a man who is vindictive and doesn't want to lose. So what do you think?
He craves attention. That's he is. I can tell you in my work as a public defender, I've had specialized training in looking for certain personality disorders. One of them is narcissistic personality disorder. I think if you go on the Wikipedia page and look up narcissistic personality disorder, Donald Trump's picture might as well be there. So he is a man who absolutely craves attention. So I think it's just not in him to just go quietly off and play golf with his trophy wife. He's going to find something. I've heard he's going to start his own network. But also it's a thing of Donald Trump really has no interest in doing the nuts and bolts of organizing and doing things that I can tell anyway. So that's where he's going to have a problem. Now, as far as what comes in the future, now what's going on with this newest articles of impeachment, that's going to have a lot to say. And for whatever it's worth, I think the first time they tried to impeach Donald Trump, the Democrats really did a disservice to the process. They had no chance the first time around of getting Republicans to vote for it. To me, it was purely partisan, appeasing our base that we wanted to be able to say that we impeached Donald. It was just, they really did a disservice the first time. Now, these events, more recent, this one, frankly, I think they should be investigated, and it should be decided of just what role Donald Trump played in it. Now, speaking, I've got a note here. Can you still hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry about that. This time, I think it should. Now, speaking as a lawyer, I think if you just look solely at what Donald Trump said on this rally on January 6th, I think you're going to have a hard time making a case. Supreme Court case Brandenburg versus Ohio sets a very, very high standard on what speech, prosecuting someone for inciting based solely on speech. That was a case a Ku Klux Klan leader in Ohio was literally saying, we're going to go to Washington and we're going to start hanging people. And the Supreme Court ruled that qualified as for free speech protection. So I think if you look solely at what Donald Trump said at this rally, I don't think the Democrats or the Senate is going to be able to get past the Brandenburg test as is referred. Now, if you look though at everything Donald Trump did after the election, but more specifically what he did after the speech, I think Donald Trump's got some real problems. I mean, the reports I've got mostly come from leftist sources, so I'm going to put that disclaimer in there. But I've heard reports that basically after the rally, he just went back to the White House and he watched the events on TV, and he's kind of like, oh, isn't this funny? My supporters are just raising hell out there. We have reports that the Capitol Police tried to summon the National Guard, and that Donald Trump did not summon the National Guard, which I don't know if you want me to go into that issue or not, but that definitely could be problematic for Donald Trump. The reports we have is actually it was Mike Pence was the one ultimately who authorized sending in the National Guard several hours after it was clear things were getting out of hand. That could be a very big problem for Donald Trump. Now,
so Michael, I don't mean to distract you here, but when I was doing some research for this, I want to take us back just to a time in history we talked about earlier, Jefferson and Aaron Burr. The reason why I want to bring that up is because according to what I've read, that there was a precedent set for executive. They can't be tried after they get out of office, because Aaron Burr in history, you said that he was a dissenter of Thomas Jefferson. And as the story goes, he left and he tried to, he was charged for treason by actually trying to take over some land that was acquired by Thomas Jefferson. And so when the case was brought to the Supreme Court, Thomas Jefferson basically, he washed his hands and said, I'm not going to say anything that's going to indict Aaron Burr. And at that point in time, they had a precedent where, okay, you know what, the president, whatever he does, you can be impeached, but he's basically not going to be charged for anything after the fact. Is there any truth to that? Or?
Not exactly. I mean, we have had instances where people in public office were prosecuted for after they left. Most notably, Ulysses S. Grant, defense secretary, was prosecuted for bribery, and after he left office. So yeah, there has been precedent for doing that.
Okay.
Now the whole thing with Aaron Burr and Jefferson obviously did not like what Aaron Burr did and put him through. So Jefferson really did not hide the fact that Aaron Burr was going to be a one-term vice president, irregardless of whether he won re-election in 1804 or not.
Okay.
So Aaron Burr kind of got the hint. And so he was planning on leaving Washington altogether. And so his plan was to go back to New York. I think he was going to start up a law career, but there was such bad blood between him and Alexander Hamilton. That was what led to the duel where Hamilton got killed. Mm-hmm. And for all practical purposes, that ended Aaron Burr's political career with the government. So he went to Louisiana. That was after the Louisiana Purchase was in 1803, where the United States of America bought a big chunk of land from Napoleon west of the Mississippi.
Correct.
And so Aaron Burr did go to Louisiana. Aaron Burr did believe that ultimately there would be a war between the United States of America and Spain regarding the territory of Texas. I'm a fourth generation Texan. Okay, so I have some feelings about that. Now, when he was in Louisiana, he got close to a general named Wilkerson. Very shady character in American history. General Wilkerson is somebody, I kind of relate him now to like Steve Bannon in modern terms. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, he definitely had an agenda, and it's not real clear what his agenda was. He definitely was a troublemaker, and it's kind of like, was he the instigator of it, or was he the follower of it? It is very, very unclear. But apparently there was some correspondence that was Aaron Burr's opponents say that he was in open conspiracy with Wilkerson to seize a part of the Louisiana Purchase and break away from the United States. Aaron Burr's version of it is kind of like, no, I was not, that Wilkerson did this and sullied my good name that I had. And it's all part of all this fake news of people who are trying to fame me. Well, have we ever heard of that happening in American history? Oh, gee, let me think. So, like I said, what exactly really happened? But there was a trial where Aaron Burr was charged with treason, and he was acquitted because apparently there was nobody who could really corroborate Aaron Burr's involvement with Wilkerson. Speaking as a constitutional historian practicing law, I find it kind of fascinating that Aaron Burr wound up using the Constitution as his defense for trying to violate the Constitution. So, interesting set of facts there.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that was a side note, but this idea of executive privilege is what I was really honing in on, because now that Donald Trump is gone, and, we both kind of agree that he's probably not just going to go quietly, whether this impeachment actually goes through or not, the second impeachment of Donald Trump, is there a precedent for him to be charged with anything? Because there's a lot of talk on social media of that, all these pardons that Trump did, he should have pardoned himself and his family and whatever else. I can't really tell what he did that was necessarily illegal, but, shed some light on me there.
Well, first of all, the president does have almost unlimited power to pardon. However, it specifically says in the Constitution, except under cases of indictment or impeachment. So I would definitely argue the fact that the Democrats filed articles of impeachment. First of all, the idea of a president pardoning himself, that has never happened in our history. I have a very hard time thinking courts would uphold that. But if they do vote in the Senate, and my understanding is that the House of Representatives votes articles of impeachment, sends it to the Senate. In order to remove him from office, 2/3 of the senators have to vote in favor of removal. Well, there's no point in removing Donald Trump now. He's already gone. Mm-hmm. However, they can, my understanding is, just by a simple majority vote, they can vote to bar him from ever running for office again under the 14th Amendment. That's where I think Donald Trump's going to have a very serious problem, because I think there's a very real chance that there can be 51 senators if you include Kamala Harris as a potential tiebreaker, and the two senators who just got elected from Georgia as Democrats, I think there's a very real chance that, plus all these senators had to go through their version of a high school active shooter drill just a few weeks ago. I think there's a very real chance that the majority of the senators could vote that Donald Trump can never hold public office again. That is going to be, it's never happened in our history before with a president. I believe that has happened with some cabinet members, most notably Grant's defense secretary. So that is going to be an interesting, I tell people, if nothing else, Donald Trump is going to give us bar examiners some fascinating questions to ask bar students for the next 100 years. That will ultimately be his true legacy.
So I guess the obvious question is that, the Democrats just wanted to shame Donald Trump and, prevent any kind of possible uprising through him or, any of his faction to run again in office. But is there a possibility of criminal charges being laid against him? Do you think that that's...
Oh, I think there very definitely can be. Now, first of all, the president does not have the power to pardon anybody for state offenses. Okay. Now, my understanding is the state of New York has been investigating Donald Trump and Donald Trump's business organizations for quite a while. They pretty much put everything on hold while he's been the 4 years he's been president.
So that's a separate issue than anything that he
completely separate. Completely separate. Yeah, he has absolutely no power to pardon himself or anybody else for state crimes, only federal crimes.
Okay.
Now, president can pardon anybody for federal crimes, but not state crimes. So that part alone, Donald Trump is going to have a serious problem dealing with that. Also, future tax evasion issues there. So I think probably what goes on in the state courts in New York is probably going to I think Donald, the old I Love Lucy show where Ricky Ricardo will say, "You got some splaining to do." I think he's going to have some splaining to do in the Southern District of New York. And I think it's no coincidence that he decided that he wasn't not going to move back to New York. He was going to move to Florida. Of course, from the stories I've heard about New York City these days, frankly, I wouldn't want to live there either right now. So
right. So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, as we can see, the federal government likes to protect its own. And so, the whole story about the impeachment, the first impeachment of Donald Trump, when he was trying to dig up dirt on Joe Biden, they call that, meddling, right? Is a famous word. But at the same time, Hunter Biden was under FBI surveillance while Donald Trump was asking the president of Ukraine, was there any dirt to be had? So, now that Biden's in office, we'll see more corruption hidden, and they seem to be wanting to uncover all the corruption that Donald Trump had. Like, they just want to destroy this guy.
Oh, they definitely have. Trump derangement syndrome is a very real thing. Ironically, I think the 24-hour news channels are going to miss Donald Trump because he was great for their ratings. So ultimately, that's going to be their undoing. Now, I think Hunter Biden, there's a lot more to the story with Hunter Biden. Will they be able to link that to Joe Biden? Joe Biden's been a senator for a very, very long time. I tell people he's like a rusty weather vane. He turns in whatever direction the wind blows. He's kind of the instead of being the senator from Delaware, it'd be more appropriate to say he's the senator from MasterCard. So I think he's savvy enough to know that Beau Biden was the good son, Hunter Biden was the not so good son. That I have no doubt he probably loved Hunter, but I have a really hard time believing that Joe Biden just completely I'm being a lawyer, so I'm going to phrase things very carefully here. On the one hand, I think he had a hard time not knowing what Hunter Biden was up to. Yet on the other hand, I think he was savvy enough to know that he was not going to be an active participant in Hunter Biden's activities. Mm-hmm. So I suspect he's going to find a way to distance himself from whatever and all the various things Hunter Biden was doing. Where I think Joe Biden is going to have major problems. First of all, I think he is, in his mind, he's going to just basically, he's the restoration candidate. He's going to restore the old order. Mm-hmm. He's going to try to restore the old order that Donald Trump destroyed. And I think he's going to find that things have just simply gone too far. I think he's going to find that his own party, he's not even going to be able to govern his own party. I think that the Democratic Socialists, and let's call them that, the Democratic Socialists, I also refer to them as the mean green. He's not going to be able to pacify them. They're not going to be satisfied with him at all. They did not like him at all. Mm-hmm. It was just purely that they saw him as their best chance to get rid of Donald Trump. And I agree with the people who say that 2016, it was more of a case that Hillary Clinton lost than Donald Trump won. So I do feel like now that Donald Trump, the Democrats did unite behind Joe Biden in order to get rid of Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. But now that Donald Trump is out of the picture, they can't help themselves. They're going to start trying to take over stuff again. That's the way socialists are.
Well, is it possible that we're going to see a President Kamala Harris in the next 4 years?
I would not be a bit surprised if Kamala and the majority of the cabinet members invoked the 25th Amendment to get rid of Joe Biden based on the fact that he's mentally incompetent. I would not be a bit surprised to see that happening in the next 4 years. I suspect that before it gets to that point, Joe Biden will be strongly encouraged to just go ahead and resign from office. Or he'll kind of like be frozen in carbonite or something to where he just basically like you can't do anything. I think that's a very real possibility the next 4 years. Yeah, I do think so.
So we're going to have to strap in our seatbelts on for this political theater that we're going to continue to watch, as most things coming from Washington are just, to me, just theater. I know a lot of people rest their head on what goes on in Washington, D.C., but for us freedom-loving individuals, it's like, just let them do what they're going to do and live your life to the fullest any way you can.
Well, I do have to say I have been very disappointed with my fellow freedom-loving Americans the last 10 months. The Libertarian Party in particular, I feel like have totally missed a golden opportunity. To me, the doctors that were behind the Great Barrington Declaration, I would like to give a shout out for them. I agreed with what they say. I encourage people to go to the website of the Great Barrington Declaration and read it and decide for themselves if they want to sign it. I'm very disappointed that I have not heard more from freedom-loving Americans this last 10 months. And I can tell you, as a lawyer in particular who has devoted 20 years of his life to doing my part to uphold the Sixth Amendment, it sure looks to me, I was one of the last attorneys to do a jury trial in Dallas County in February 2020. We have not had a jury trial in Dallas County since March of 2020. That simply cannot continue. Do we even have a Sixth Amendment anymore? Frankly, I'm starting to wonder. I really am. Yeah. Yes.
Well, let's end on a high note, Michael.
Okay.
we do have a new regime, a new emperor, and depending on what side of the political spectrum you're on, it's going to either, unify, which I think we're both probably on the opposite side, or it's going to, can further erode. But I always like when anything new starts, we have new people, new presidents, new regimes with hope for the best, right? I've heard it, and I've seen it on Facebook a couple times, although I can't respond, that people who are disagreeing with Joe Biden saying, you know what, I don't agree with his politics, but I wish him well. I hope that he actually does unify or attempts to unify, so this country just doesn't implode. For me, I say just let it all dissolve, and I'm a secessionist. If you hear some of my other podcasters, but I certainly hope there's not violence on the streets because of all this.
Well, I hope so too. I will say that all my life I've heard old men say that the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Now I'm the old man saying the world's going to hell in a handbasket. So, okay, well, if you want a high note, basically old men like me have been wrong so far every single time. So take that for whatever it's worth.
Oh, very cool. Michael, you got anything you want to plug and anything that you're doing publicly people should be aware of?
Well, I'm kind of looking of what, because I would like to see something that freedom-loving people can get behind. To me, the Libertarian Party is just simply not up to the task. And so I kind of like to find some legal foundation, because, I do have a law license. I have a certain talent for being able to stand up in a courtroom and weave a tapestry of words. So I try to use that talent in a good way. I will definitely say that I think you podcasters are doing the most good in the liberty movement, because if nothing else, we need to present people with an alternative to the mainstream media, that the empire media, because the empire controls the media. The empire controls our education system. So I definitely do encourage you podcasters to continue doing what y'all are doing to give people an alternate platform.
Well, I appreciate that sentiment there, Michael. I will probably have you on again. You've been a very good guest for me. And like I said, you've been on Tommy Selman's show a few times. So, wise men, and whether old or young, wise men who want to fight for liberty is what we need, just like you said. So,
okay. Well, take care of yourself, Mike.
Thank you.